All right, so it's Todd Atkins, and we're back with another MMA Conspiracy Hour. I'm here with Miguel Iterati and Mike Davis from the Lights Out podcast. Mike Davis wearing his Kazushi Sakuraba shirt. For anybody who's not familiar, that's a classic design. And we're going to discuss the Jake Paul versus Anderson Silva fight that just happened. And I'm going to let Mike go this time because I think he's chomping at the bit to start.
Well, Miguel and I did a little pre-prep for this. All I can tell you is watch the highlight reel. When you watch the highlight reel, you see a lot of pulled punches. When you watch the knockdown, there was a step of the on top of the foot, but there was no protest by Anderson Silva. Like, this is, if I have to try to explain to anybody that this was a work, brother, go find another podcast. Go listen to Ariel Helwani. That's what I want you to do. I need you to turn this off and go listen to him. That's all I got to say, Todd.
Miguel, what's your kind of take on this?
I'm going to preface this by saying that I didn't watch it, and I won't watch a Jake Paul thing. So, you can take that with a grain of salt. I have watched a few of the highlights and things just to see what was going on. That wasn't the Anderson that fought Tito even last time. It didn't seem to be an Anderson who took any risks or did any of the. Now he's 47. This brings to mind, what are the boxing commissions doing approving this stuff? They're actually, and that's the big problem here with the whole Jake Paul thing, whether it's a work or not. What he's doing under the facade of bringing fighters bigger paydays and more attention, which to a certain extent they're getting, but then afterwards they will be discarded and they won't. But he's getting them a big payday. But at the end of the day, what's broken here is, and lawyers may argue with me. Lawyers may say you're wrong. There's corporations. This, that. No. At the end of the day, every fighter that Jake Paul has fought has been paid by Jake Paul.
Yes. That's
something, how does that happen in any, commission state? And that's what he's doing there is he's orchestrating the whole show and the payday in there. And then who knows, what conversations are had. I don't know whether, they're actually scripting or worrying about it. But I do know that it does have the facade of coming to an end when he loses. Anderson Silva may have been the guy who at some point, some people, even myself, had some hope that, that he might, get mean in round 3 and just get rid of this whole facade thing, but it didn't happen. Anderson
pro wrestling.
He looked like a dead man walking in this one. Like there was no showmanship or anything like that. And, very concise, it wasn't, I don't think any of those MMA guys wanted to go out there, but that's the other part of my argument is that since he's fought a pro basketball player and 4 MMA guys, or, 3 MMA guys in 4 fights. And he was supposed to fight Hashim Rahman. But boxing as a business, I do believe that they reject this Jake Paul stuff more. And they have a hard time doing it because the first person to do it and let them in boxing in this type of facade way was Mayweather. And in boxing, they really can't say no to Mayweather. So they had to allow it to happen. And now as a consequence, we get these other things. But they don't like it. And the Rahman fight fell apart because obviously something wasn't working there the way Jake Paul wanted. There's something not kosher there. And boxing, I think, is reacting that way to this, which is why he keeps going back to MMA guys who, at the end of the day, are without a UFC contract and unemployed. Tyrone Woodley, Ben Askren, Anderson Silva, none of them were getting calls from the UFC to be coaches or to go be commentators or anything like that. So they were unemployed guys. Of course, you grab a big payday. And then from there, how you perform, none of them has performed anywhere near where they could or would at the top of their game in these. And this guy continues to circumvent. What he's circumventing is the entire dues paying that every boxer goes through. That's why it's offensive to boxing.
Yeah. So, Todd, every single person that he's fought, with the exception of the basketball player, because that was under the Triller banner, has been paid by Jake Paul. Does that seem right?
Yeah, it doesn't, obviously. But
Yeah.
I do want to play devil's advocate here because I don't think the fight made him look good. If it was a work fight, he didn't come out on the end looking great.
Well,
It was a
if he did,
competitive fight.
okay, if he did look great, Anderson Silva might have said, screw this, and actually really fought. He's in a situation where he knows the better athlete standing across from him. It was a fixed fight. I mean, it was a fake fight. If you just look at the footwork. Just look at the dalliances of just how they were moving, and what
no
about
doubt.
the protests? The stepping up on the foot. It wasn't a real competitive fight. Yeah,
Yeah,
Miguel,
I
Miguel,
can
you watched
see what you're saying. I thought Anderson's footwork was light years better than Jake Paul's. I mean, it was. Jake Paul didn't look like a fluid boxer at all. That's what I'm saying. The fight, if it was a work fight, it didn't make him look good. He didn't look good in the fight.
He didn't. The script wasn't a good. Yeah, I mean,
They got exactly what they wanted out. They got a 30-second video clip of him knocking the guy down, and they got a win which remains a 0 on the loss side, right? So as long as he's undefeated and can sell the next fight, whoever it's against,
the next MMA guy.
He doesn't really. He's not. To the average fan, we don't know what it's going to look like. Since we have some understanding of combat sports, like you said, Todd, he looks limited. He's not to me, boxing is so refined, it's like ballet dancing. You can't just fake it. You know what I mean? No. It's like you can't just leap into high-level ballet and pull off the moves. And MMA is more like a breakdancing. Stand-up part of it, whatever they do, but it's not ballet. So he's found mates there, unemployed guys, who Anderson is considered the best, or many people would say he's the best MMA striker of all time. Now, in boxing, you've taken away a lot of his weapons, but his boxing is still serviceable. When he fought Julio Cesar Chavez, I felt, Chavez is a serviceable boxer. He won world titles, but they're suspect in nature. He's not considered a top shelf boxer, but he's a good professional with 50 fights, 50 wins, handful of losses. And that's about Anderson's level, a mid-level boxer, maybe a top 10, top 15, top 20 guy in his weight class. That was Anderson's level. That should be enough to beat Jake Paul. Unless someone's really scripting this stuff real well, and the Anderson-Julio Cesar fight was structured in the past just for that, to give Anderson props on the boxing side. Because then after that, he fought Tito. That means none of the fights with unemployed MMA guys here mean nothing. Every MMA guy here can't believe somebody's going to offer them that kind of money now, because there's never been anybody offering any money for retired guys. Like a Bellator, but these guys are done. They're not even getting Bellator offers.
Yeah.
No, one moment. I don't want you to gloss over what you just said, because that's interesting. No one's saying that. Was the Julio Cesar Chavez fight set up for this? I've heard some people say they think this fight was fake. There's people out there saying that, but no one's really talking about that. And I think, that's an interesting take to consider.
Well, let's talk about Miguel's, when he was talking about breakdancing and ballet. And boxing guys, like if this is your foot, they're always pivoting on the balls of their feet. They're always at the front of their foot. MMA guys will oftentimes go heel to toe. And it's a completely different way of moving. And the footwork in this fight was atrocious on both sides. It was two people it was like a heavy sparring competition with Anderson Silva taking multiple rounds off. That's what it was.
But shouldn't we hold Anderson to the fire a little bit if he's agreeing to do this?
The agreements, they come in a certain way, That's
the question, Miguel. The structure of the contract.
Yeah, we already know this circus is already 6 fights in, right? So we already know that to a certain extent it will be damaged and comes to an end when he loses. So the guy who's the next opponent already walks in knowing, well, if I beat him, nobody else gets a payday. And then the atmosphere is there. He treats you well. He says, oh, you're a rematch, you're whatever is there. And everybody gets lackadaisical. And then plus there's the thought that most of these athletes should think it's easy work, right? And then all of a sudden maybe the guy, look, I saw Chris Brennan saying that the guy has some boxing talent. And I defer to Chris. Chris is obviously much more expert than I am. But I do think that you're selling short there. The fact is that boxing, the guys that are boxers, the Hashim Rahman people on that fight that fell apart, those guys have been doing the sport since they were 10. And there's a dues paying that comes with those sports, wrestling, boxing, going to tournaments, amateur shows, and things like that. That Hashim Rahman has been through, that Jake Paul just basically craps on and is trying to eliminate that. And at some point, that should catch up to him. There should be a point where he simply will not be able to hide that he cannot match. Is Canelo going to be that guy? Like, I don't believe that Paul is like that. We're watching an elite athlete either. He's a guy. He's a young man. He's in great shape. He takes care of himself. But was not a naturally gifted athlete. He wasn't running a 9.9 100-yard dash in high school. Or whatever the example is going. He's an average athlete, or a little bit above average. Against Anderson Silva, against these guys, those types of things should show. The fact is Anderson didn't do anything. He didn't give half the fight he did against Adesanya. Obviously, with Tito, it didn't. Like, where was those types of more lethal punches? Like, you're going to tell me that Jake Paul has better chin than Tito? Okay, maybe
his head movement was just so great. Well, Miguel, let's also look at this. You got Nate Diaz that literally left the UFC going, I want that Jake Paul fight. And he wasn't talking like, I want to beat Jake Paul's ass. He was saying, I want that Jake Paul money. I mean, let's be clear on that. He wants that Jake Paul money. So, Todd, your question was, can you hold Anderson to the fire? I can't blame anybody for putting food in their children's mouths, and it hurts me to see Anderson Silva do that, but it's also kind of just like an awakening as to why are these guys having to do that? Have they not made enough money? Right, Miguel?
The thing with the fighter is this: is just like between round 4 and 5, and he's all bloody and he's a mess, and the doctors want to stop the fight, and he goes, no, I want to keep going. I want to keep going. That also has a certain aspect that is the same at the end of his career. Anderson even said it when he left the UFC. He wants to keep going. He wants to keep fighting. So it can't be left in the athlete's hands. At some point, a boxing commission really has to step in, and they don't do this enough in any sport, which is where they say, only in extreme cases, and sometimes maybe even in misplaced cases, because for example, Melvin Guillard is a guy who's an experienced MMA fighter having trouble getting a license, even though he financially needs it. And probably, I don't know what his medicals are like, but I talked to him. He doesn't seem punch drunk or anything like that. I'd like to see. They're basing it on the fact that he has a 1-9 record or 0-9 in his last handful of fights. They're not really doing medical work.
Let me get in on this, Miguel. It hurts for me to say this, but Melvin was supposed to fight in Iowa. He had a fight coming up in November 19th, I want to say. Iowa Commission just turned it down. One, it's two people that make the decision. One said yes. The other person said no. They said it's just too much heat on it, and that they're afraid to touch it. So Melvin Guillard, I don't know if he's got the news yet, but yeah, he's officially retired.
So what happens is, unfortunately, Melvin, God bless him, and I hope he's doing fine. But just being very frank and honest, he's not fighting on a freaking pay-per-view in front of 14,000 people anymore. This is why the Boxing Commission feels empowered enough to shut him down. But when Jake Paul rolls into town with his whole circus, and your Boxing Commission is going to be able to take percentages of the purse for this and percentages for the refs and this and that and the other stuff and base their whole show on that, they can't say no to the payday either. So Melvin is the guy that gets crapped on. And they say, well, out of 80 fighters that we licensed, we suspended 2, and 3 we didn't license, and they have percentages that they can play with. But that's completely useless because they're not doing their job when they license a 47-year-old to fight with a 25-year-old, and the experience levels. This fight just says, let's not do this. There's no reason to. From a boxing commission analysis, one guy so experienced in one sport crossing over, the other guy limited background. Makes no sense. Makes no sense to do this fight except for the money. And that's what the boxing commission, that's as far as they go. That's criminal as to what their real role should be. So I hold the boxing commissions completely responsible for the circus and then for everything else that we're forced to see beyond that.
But I don't want to get off track here, though. Let's talk about one thing, because I want to get back to these guys, because they're helping Jake Paul drag the MMA community. Because after he beats them,
well, he's trolling the MMA
he
community.
trashes the entire community, and these guys are helping him. These are legends of the sport, especially Anderson, and he's helping Jake Paul drag the MMA community by getting beat by him.
Hold up, Todd. The MMA community, they're not paying Anderson Silva's bills. They're not paying Ben Askren's bills. They're not paying Tyron Woodley's bills. So I get what you're saying. Well, it's bad for the MMA community. Well, maybe the MMA community should have paid their bills. Maybe they shouldn't be in this position. Right. And Miguel, you're talking about paying the dues in terms of boxers. This is just as big of a black eye for like a Bob Arum or, the other bigger boxer. Was it Eddie Hearn? This is just as big of a black eye for them as it is Dana White.
I mean, the bottom line is Vasyl Lomachenko, a guy who was in the last 10 years on the pound for pound list. No, but Vasyl Lomachenko fought on the same weekend as Jake Paul and took second stage.
Yep.
What is boxing? Everybody who's a boxing fan can now be compared to women in the WMMA, like those jokes about them, like they name your 5 favorite basketball players, ladies, and they can't do it. Well, boxing just completely allowed Jake Paul to take center stage. They should have been front and center backing Vasyl Lomachenko, still probably one of the top 5 guys out there. And put him front and center. That's the sport. And nobody did that. They just sat by silently.
Anderson Silva just made more money than Terrence Crawford did in his last fight in a win.
And that's the problem with the MMA guys. When they get cut loose from the UFC, their options become limited. Most of them are not ready. And even if you are ready, like George St. Pierre, you're going to have a hard time saying no to a 7-figure offer. Because he may have $10 million in the bank or whatever already. $1 million is $1 million. That wakes up, for a one-night work, guys like that, George St. Pierre may be in the running for the next one. And that would be a travesty of enormous proportions. Diaz also, but Diaz almost fits in the same boat. The bottom line is if GSP goes in there, now Jake Paul is going to be able to claim that he's beat 2 of the top 5 all-time best MMA players. And if Nate Diaz is in there, then he could say 3 Hall of Famers, on top of that. This is so
blasphemous.
Not within, like, if you had to say 5 years ago, this is what's going to happen, and here are the steps. The chances of this are like winning the lottery or getting hit by an asteroid. There's no way that all these things can be lining up for Jake Paul all on the up and up. He's just not that good.
Todd, it's a sad day in combat sports. And if you look at the message boards, the UFC and boxing all had an event on the same day. 98% of the postings were about Jake Paul.
Yeah, and like I've told you guys before, I have Tony Holden on my friends list on Facebook. His son promoted this event, and he was kind of saying, look, boxing is dying. He said, HBO is gone. Showtime is nothing really. And he's saying Jake Paul's fights are the only thing bringing attention to the sport. Lomachenko, no one watched him because he wasn't fighting anybody wanted to see him fight. Boxing is dying. He even said that, and he's a boxing promoter. I'll show you his Facebook post. He said, these Jake Paul fights are the only thing that people bringing any interest in these days, because these other guys don't want to fight each other in boxing. We aren't putting on the fights people want to see. and he's drawing attention from younger people. That's just the way it is.
And they can sit bitterly on the sidelines and watch the money go away. The problem is there is no consistency in boxing. Yeah, Lomachenko is at this point a sideshow because he's so great. Hey, you want to go see him, but if the matchups aren't there where he's threatened, yeah, he had a hard fight this last weekend. So, whatever happens, happens. But that's the sport. That's what people like, the drama of the sport, not really knowing what is going to happen. I didn't really want to believe that Anderson Silva was going to lose this weekend. And when you start, I was reading while it was going on, you're starting to see rounds go and taking the time, and this, that, and the other stuff. And, he had a moment of flashiness, and that was it for Anderson. He shut it down after that. You start to see the writing on the wall, and you say it's actually happening. It's almost like watching an American election.
Yes.
So boxing is kind of created, Jake Paul.
Todd, Miguel just threw a shot there.
What did you do? Oh, I'm sorry.
Miguel, that last line one more time.
It's almost like watching an American election.
Ooh, that hurts. Oof.
But I think boxing is kind of created, Jake Paul, because we're not going to get Fury versus Usyk. We're not going to get Davis versus Garcia. We're not going to get Benavidez versus Canelo. We're not going to get Spence versus Crawford. We're not going to get any of those fights, probably ever. None of those guys are probably ever going to fight each other. All fights we want to see, and they're never going to do them. So I think they've kind of created him out of their own failure.
I completely agree. That's part of what, I compared them to women in the WNBA fans, that kind of running joke. But yes, why are they not backing their own sport? Why are people really not allowing this to take center stage and not giving me something comparable? At least the UFC lets that go on nowadays. It just kind of rolls their eyes and stuff, but they've been putting out their consistent product like always. And you really can't say there are too many fights that you don't see at some point in the UFC. They're better matchmakers than in boxing, and they've got a little more purity there. There's stuff that, Frankie Edgar and Conor McGregor probably should have happened, in the beginning of that stuff. There are examples of missed opportunities, but not like in boxing. But still, there's the self-policing of the sports. Yes, they've allowed Jake Paul to step in, and when they didn't shut it down properly, he stayed. I don't blame him.
So, Todd, Miguel, I know we're wrapping up right now, but in order to fully understand just what shambles boxing is in, Dana White makes up a belt called the BMF belt and has Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal fight for it. Canelo Alvarez was fighting on that same night, and they paused the entire main event so this pretend intercontinental title could take place with the UFC. And then after it was done, they went past their pay-per-view allotment in order to have their event on. That was the day boxing bent the knee to MMA. And anybody that tells you differently, I think they're either misinformed or they're just in disbelief because a sport that they love so much has once again turned its back on them. But the Canelo Alvarez holding off while the BMF belt bout took place, that was it for boxing. That was the sinking of the ship. Todd,
wrap it up, brother.
Come on, bring us home. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, and again, this Todd Atkins with Mike Davis and Miguel Edarate, and
from where, Todd?
Anybody that watches this on YouTube, let us know in the comments what you think about this fight or about this discussion in general. Take care.
You're good, brother.